David, dude, welcome back. It's round two. Stoked to have you here. Round two. So quick recap, I think, before we dive in. Here's what I remember. You grew up in a huge wild family. I remember you called it a little bit of Lord of the Flies ish. And I like that. You talked about how you barely made it out of high school. You took off to live on the beach in Hawaii. You were chasing the surf. And then you had the wipeout that shattered your knee. You somehow ended up at a cattle ranch in Arizona. And then back home and made a giant pivot, ended up going back to school. And then another one into the Army to join the Ranger Regiment. And I think that's about where we left off, right? You were heading into Ranger school. You already done your first deployment, and then you heading into Ranger school. Is that about where you remember it?
Yeah, that's about right. If it's looking back on my life, that's the order of operation with a little bit of granularity in between all of it. But yeah, that's it. Yeah. I think within the first year, 15 months I was in regiment, that I got into regiment. I went on one deployment, and then they shipped me off to Ranger school. You go through assessment selection, and then if you're a combat arms, whether you're an officer of branch or whether you're enlisted, you have roughly 2 years to get your Ranger tab after you go through selection, right? And then if not, eventually you'll get and this is a beautiful thing about Ranger Regiment, unless you were part of it, you get RFS, which is released for standards. So you'll get released out of Ranger Regiment back to the conventional Army. And so it's like, it's a rite of passage, but it's also like the thing that will allow you to have time and space and perpetuity in regiment. Yeah, as a combat arms. So you want to go to Ranger school, but you also don't want to fail Ranger school, because you got to maybe 1 to 2 chances to get through it. And if you don't, it's some of the writings on the walls. I don't know what the rules are today, but I'm sure I would go as far to bet a paycheck that Ranger Regiment hasn't changed its stance on combat arms guys needing Ranger tabs, and girls now. When I was there, it was just guys, but guys and girls, need their Ranger tab to stay there and not have to go anywhere else. So to get into the school, to get your tab, what's that process look like? Yeah, it's an interesting process, and I don't know how it is for folks, because people go to Ranger school, and I'm sure there's some viewers that might argue with me, but it's one of the premier leadership schools in the military, right? And that's not my words, that's their words. But so you get a lot of people from the regular Army, you get people from foreign armies, right, and militaries. You have people from the Navy, from the Marines. You have every flavor of military kind of going through there. I would say the majority, probably about 50%, 30 to 50% of the folks who go to Ranger school, a lot of times are from Ranger Regiment, because they have the largest amount of humans that need the tab to be able to maintain their position within that special operation unit. So it's a rite of passage, and again, like right, wrong, or indifferent, like, you are certainly treated a little bit different before you have your tab and after you have your tab. So there's things there's externalities and second order effects that happen when you go and you come back with your Ranger tab. But the thing is too, is that, with about 70% attrition through the phases, there's 3 phases. There's really 4 phases, but there's 3 main phases. The first phase is like 3 weeks of like, can you make it into phase 1? Right. It's much more physical. You're doing all your ruck marches and all those things. And then they have a Benning phase. So you spend 2-3 weeks in Fort Benning. It used to be called Desert Phase. They used to do it in Utah, but they took that out. So you do your first phase in Benning. Then if you make it through the first phase, you go to Mountain Phase, which is up in the Appalachians. So you'll jump in if the weather's good. You get to jump into the Appalachians. And then from there, if you make it through the second phase, you go to the third phase, which is Swamp Phase, which is in like the panhandle of Florida. And all of them have their own little nuances. The blood, sweat, and tears are all different color in each one of those phases. And then the time of year you're going through Ranger school has a big difference. In regiment, we would say, like, if you were a winter Ranger, you would sew your tab on with white thread you know. And if you weren't, then you would just do it with black thread, right? So if you were a Winter Ranger, that was, I don't know if that actually really happens, but that was the thing. Oh, I was a Winter Ranger. I'm going to put, white threaded, I'm going to sew my tab on with white thread. But I was a Winter Ranger. I went in January, and I hate being hot, but I'll tell you what, I might hate being cold even more. So.
That's funny, dude. Did you, so which one of those three was the worst from your view?
They were all equally terrible and all equally gratifying. The first phase, you want to just get out of Benny, right? Because and what made it even like worse, and a lot of like probably I think the 82nd has it. That, there's a lot there. They call it pre-ranger, so you go to pre-ranger school, and we called it CERT, and so you go to CERT for 3 weeks, right up until the weekend before you went into ranger school. And what they did, and I couldn't figure out why we did this, but I kind of get it now. That 3 weeks was probably some of the hardest 3 weeks that I went. And this is pre-ranger school, right? And the regiment runs it. They run their CERT program. And it was, I think, 10 degrees in Fort Benning, and we were sleeping out in the woods. We were land nabbing, rucking, just like, and so I'm like, I'm beat down right now before I even go into ranger school. And, if you don't make it through CERT pre-ranger in Ranger Regiment, you don't get to go to ranger school. Right. So it's like, you actually got to go through CERT and pass it and do all, and, pass your PT test, do all the things, hit your land nav, and then you get sent to ranger school. And the first 3 weeks of ranger school are really like learning some of the ranger tactics. They teach people how to take apart weapons and things that you're going to be tested on through the 3 phases. But they're also you have to do Malvesi, which is the obstacle course in the middle of the night. You got to hit the ruck marches. You got to hit the PT test. There's all these things. So you're constantly it's very physical, right? And they don't break you down as much because you get to go to the chow hall and you get to eat breakfast and you get to eat dinner, but you're not sleeping much, very, very little. So, and then when you go into the first phase, what they do, it's really interesting because they kind of build you up. The first phase, like you'll go out for 2 or 3 days out into the woods with your platoon, right? And then you'll come back in and you'll rest and refit and maybe get to go and maybe have a hot meal. I don't even think that was something we had there because they gave us 2 MREs a day, and typically they made us eat them at the same time, between the hours of 2 and 2:30 in the morning. And if you didn't have what you didn't have finished at the end of it got taken away from you. So you would just be chowing down, and probably getting about, 12,000 calories within a half hour, and then sleeping for a few hours and getting back up and doing it. Then you would go out for a few days, come back. And then mountain phase, you would go out for a week up in the Appalachians and then come back and rest and refit for a couple of days, and then go out for another week. In Florida, you go out for the whole 3 weeks. You're just out in the swamps. So they kind of build it up like that. But along the whole path, I would say there were times in all of the phases where in a whole week's time, you would maybe get 15 to 20 hours of sleep in 7 days.
Oh, dude.
So, sometimes it would be an hour and a half, 2 hours. Sometimes you might get a whopping 3. If you're lucky, 4 hours, but so sleep deprivation and food deprivation, it's what because ranger school, it's not a physical, this is my opinion, is not a physical test. It's a completely a mental, it's a mental thing because when I don't care if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger coming in, or you're just like a marathon runner and everything in between, you get broken down. Right? When you don't get to eat and you don't get to sleep. And that's really what they do is they break everybody down. So now when you're now tasked with making hard decisions because you get put in leadership positions, there's probably about, I would say, 5 to 10 leadership positions. And those are the ones who are being graded. And you never know when you're going to get, hey, Dave Porter, you're the platoon leader today. Or, you're the camo guy, which sucks because that was like a 125-pound rucksack with all the camo gear in it. And when you do that, the cadre, the ranger instructors, the cadre just, the RIs walk beside you with a little notepad and they don't say anything to you. and they're just taking notes. And so you're paranoid the whole time when you're in a leadership position. Because if you get a go, that means that you can go to the next phase. If you get a no-go, they'll put you in leadership maybe a couple times. And if you get a couple no-goes, like then you get held over on that phase. Right. And everybody who makes it through goes to the next phase, and you're stuck there with the class that's coming up from the phase before. And if you fail out of that phase again, like let's just say you failed phase 2, you get restarted in phase 2. If you fail it again, you go back to the beginning of phase 1. Oh. So you could be all the way in phase 3 and get a no-go twice. Boom, you're back at the beginning in the vending phase. So like it's a game, and they don't let you know whether you got to go or no-go till the end. So if you keep getting put in leadership positions, it really messes with your head. And that happened to me in my second phase. I was in a leadership position like 3 or 4 times, and I'm going like, they're putting me here because I'm getting no-goes. Oh. What I found out is I got to go on my first. They just liked how fast I moved when we tried to get to another objective. So they would put me in charge so we would hurry and get there, but it's very paranoid. Right.
Yeah.
Cause you don't know where you sit, and that psychological game, and then add the elements to it. Like it just it's really wild. It's like, if I could go back and be a fly on the wall, or like an invisible drone just to watch the psychology of all of us. Like it was like, Ranger School was a very, very interesting thing. And people would be like, oh, we don't fight like this, because it's very Vietnam kind of era based, like, tactics and things like that. But it doesn't matter if you made it a Space Invaders like situation, right? Because what you're doing is you're breaking everybody down to the same level, and you're putting them in a situation where they have to make decisions that affect like roughly 20 other people. And if you don't succeed in the mission, whatever that mission is, then you actually get a no-go, and now you're playing with weeks and months of your life, and maybe coming back without a tap. Right. Yeah. So lots of weird pressure, but in that pressure cooker, you start to see people do some really unnatural things, right? Even myself, like, I look back into the couple of things I did. I'm like, oh my God, like, I don't know if I would tell anybody that I did that, but like when you're that hungry and that tired, you start to do things to compensate.
I mean, is there anything that stands out? Not necessarily that you did, but you remember other folks doing?
Well, I'll just tell you something I did. And like,
all right.
When you bend the rules a little bit, or, you're playing a risky game in Ranger Regiment, because if you get caught, like if you put some food in from your MRE in your pocket and they find it, like you can get dropped from the course. Right. But I remember coming out of the first phase, we were going to jump into the Appalachians, but it was January going on February, and the weather was not permitting. So we got to get on a bus, which was great because it's a 2-hour drive to Daunting in northern Georgia. And we all knew we could sleep
2 hours
for 2 hours.
Yeah.
2 hours of sleep, but right at the end, they're like, Porter, get off the bus. We need you to go throw all the trash away from whatever. So I had to run over there, and I grabbed these 2 big bags of trash, and everyone's on the bus, and I got to go behind the bus, and there's some dumpsters. I flip open the dumpster. I look down, there's trash in there, and I see it's open. It's a jar of peanut butter that's about 3/4 full, and we're starving. So I look around, and I chuck the trash in and jump into the bin. And I took the peanut butter, shoved it down my pants, and then we all shared it on the bus, passing it around, eating peanut butter out of a garbage at a dumpster, and I look back and I'm like, it was the best peanut butter. And I made a lot of friends that way too, but then we had to somehow like get rid of the trash and do some things like that. But like, I never in a million years, probably never again in my life. Well, you never know what could happen. We'll jump into a dumpster and get an open jar of peanut butter and eat it with no hands down, no ego, nothing. So,
and then tell your friends about it. Celebrate it with your friends. You're like, hey, check this out. This is the best thing ever. And they're all like, yeah, let's freaking go.
We're just sticking dirty fingers. I haven't been washed for a couple of weeks in the peanut butter jar, just sharing it. And so,
oh man. That's a great story, because it also puts in perspective how you're feeling at the moment. Like if you're that hard up and you're just starving and you're going to eat dumpster peanut butter, like that puts in perspective where your mental and physical state are.
And you see it with a lot of the people. And that's when people think too much, and looking back, and I did it too, I hate to admit this, but but people, you like, oh, how'd you get through Ranger School? Oh, you had a no quit attitude. I'm like, kidding me? Like, I had the opposite. I quit 100 times in my mind every day. I'm like, this sucks. F this, man. I'm like, I'm freezing. It's literally snowing on us in the Appalachians. We're laying under trees. You're waking up with snow on your bivy sack, and it's just like miserable, right? No sleep, and like, but you're not the moment, and that's hard when you're frozen or you're so tired. I mean, I would watch people walk up to trees. I'm like, especially in the Florida phase, because like now you've been months now, especially if you've made it straight through without sleep and food deprivation. And I would watch people walk up, no kidding, walk up to trees, to big pine trees. And they, in the middle of the night, we called it droning. You get so tired, you just, and they would be actually putting what they thought was money in their pocket into the tree as if it was a vending machine and hitting buttons. And I would even walk up to them sometimes and be like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm just getting a candy bar. And I would just let them finish the task. Like anyone who's been in Ranger School who's watching this has a million stories like on what I just said, and probably a lot worse in some scenarios, because the thing that will get you like a no-go fastest is if you're leading and it's in the middle of the night, let's say 2 or 3 in the morning. What happens when you're all in a line following each other to wherever you're going to, have camp or an objective or something like that? When you're droning, you're that tired. All it takes is one person to kind of start veering to the left or right and head off into the woods, and everyone behind them like follows them. And you see this a lot. Like when you break contact with your own group, and that's a big no-no. And that's a hard thing to do when you're in a leadership position and everybody's only had, an hour of sleep or 2 hours of sleep over the last 48 hours or something like that. I saw that a lot, is that sleep deprivation made people do some wacky things.
It's a funny story, and like, fairly harmless, like thinking the pine trees a vending machine. But like, did you ever have like, look, when I get tired, I get cranky, man. Like I'm going to get like real agitated. And, did you have any situations where, you're having to deal with a teammate who's just like, you have conflict with folks, like because they're tired and just stressed out. And does that change how you deal with things?
Yeah. It does. And I think as you progress through the phases, if you don't learn real fast that you don't earn your Ranger tab on your own, you got a problem. Because you earn it with everybody to your left and right. Like no one earns their tab on their own, right? And so and it's the people who think they're going to earn it on their own that I think end up having some problems, right? And so there's a lot of discord and discomfort, especially when the cadre don't tell you you're going the wrong way. They wait 2 or 3 hours until you're completely off track and maybe tap you on the shoulder. And so there's a lot of disagreement or discussion and iteration. When you stop and you're like, are we at the right place? And people are cranky, people are tired. And if you let that fester, you just got to keep moving. It's just, it's just like when you're working out and you're doing like, I don't know, CrossFit workout or HIIT workout, whatever, like you just don't stop moving, because when you stop moving, you get tired. And when you get tired, then all of a sudden, so it's like trying to keep everyone moving and then trying to motivate the people who are just super unmotivated for a lot of like very, like realistic reasons. Like that's a hard one. Right. And so, yeah, there's the thing that you would see a lot is that people would they start thinking like, I failed in that leadership role. I bet I got a no-go. And they'd start to let that affect them. And because they think they know the outcome of of what they got graded on. And that's not the case. And they start to, like sometimes silently quit and sometimes not silently quit because they feel like they're out of the game. So you're, and people did it for me. I did it for them. You're constantly coaching people up, going like, hey, listen, man, like we just keep going. Like you'll get it on the next one. Like, and so like that don't stop, because once you stop and you start thinking, all of a sudden that's when it starts to unravel,
Yeah. That's super interesting. So I liked how you said you were comparing the no quit attitude to like, hey, that's not my reality. Like I quit, 100 times or all day, every day. I was quitting in my mind. What's kind of your stop point in your mind there? How do you keep that from, your thought turning into an action? Here's what I'm getting at. There's this book that I really like. It's called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And his whole idea is you sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, you reap a consequence. And I think there's a lot of truth. I think there's truth to that. But I also, this is what you're sharing with me here is all super insightful in that. Yes, you can think. There's a difference between thinking it and saying it, or thinking it and doing it. What's your approach? Just to think about, hey, this sucks, I'm quitting, but actually not doing it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I did that because I did. I don't know if I quit 100 times a day, but there were times where I'm just like, this is
Sure.
ridiculous. What I would do is I would go through the thought experiment of I'm over this. Like I want to be back on the beach in Hawaii where it's warm and I don't have I don't have people yelling at me and all this stuff. What I started doing is doing some backwards induction. I said, okay, if I made that decision, I got to go back to regiment with my tail between my legs and tell them I quit. I'm out. Now I'm going back to the big army, like not a bad thing, but certainly uncertainty. Then I got to go back and tell my wife and kids who I'm trying to show my kids, like when you do something, you start something. And then I'm like, all of a sudden, all those, that whole thing was like, nope, I'm not quitting. So quitting and then playing it through actually kept me going. Because maybe the second order effects of quitting, it might feel good right now because then you get to go sit by the hot burn barrel and have a piece of pizza and a cold beer because that's what they're over there telling you, like, come quit and you're going to get a hot shower and a beer and a pizza. You do that. That's great for about a minute and a half. And then you got to sit with what that reality is at that point. So I would play those realities out in my head. I'm like, okay, that's not really what I want to do, even though I really want to do that right now. And so that was certainly one of them. Because it was easier to see. I said this before, like, we're not very good about knowing what we want to be when we grow up. We're really good about knowing what we don't want to be. Like, I knew I didn't want to go and do that as the result and impact of getting out of a miserable environment and situation in the present. Is it a way to solve problems? And I don't know, but that's certainly how I did it there.
That's super logical. And it obviously worked. I mean, you made it through a bunch of really hard days. So you're describing this scenario where you're navigating, your compass is out and people, there may be some disagreements and stuff. Maybe people are under stress. And I was thinking, finding direction effectively, that can happen on a mountain range or in Florida or any of those places you described. That can also happen in a conference room, or a boardroom, like where a bunch of people are sitting around a table, they're frustrated and trying to figure out direction. Like, do those same skills apply in your leadership roles in corporate work? Or,
yeah, very much so. It's funny you asked that question. I haven't really ever thought about that, but I think there's a lot of parallels and similarities to what, and I'll just take the Ranger School example, right? Because you have a clear mission. It's very clear what you're supposed to do, like the end result, right? Just like in business, like we want this result. There's a lot of ways to get there. And there's a lot of kind of right ways. And then there's a kind of a lot of wrong ways. And then there's just absolutely the wrong way. This is maybe a personality trait. You've heard the saying, like, a camel was a horse created in a committee, right? When people sit there and iterate, like, I want a horse, if I tell my team, they all get a bunch of people and they have 27 meetings, all of a sudden they come out with a camel. And it's like, well, we want to put a water hump on it and its feet are bigger. And all of a sudden it's like, no, I wanted a horse. You know what I mean? And you got a camel. Very,
That's
so
awesome.
Like sometimes in Ranger School, like you can't sit around and figure out what the best course of action path would be. Do we want to go straight up to that mountain here in the Appalachians, or should we zigzag back and forth? Right. Mm-hmm. You could spend, especially when you're tired and hungry, a day and a half trying to figure out how to navigate up the mountain, But what I found is just like, just pick a way and just go do something. Just pick a path up the mountain. I realized many times that I shouldn't have tried to go straight up and over, even though it's the fastest point from A to B, because it's better to zigzag back and forth up the big Appalachian mountain. But at the end of the day, if you just step off and start making forward progress, like you can change course along the way to get to where you want to be. That's a parallel in corporate America too. Like, you know what? You got like someone's got to make a decision to say we're moving out, and you know what? You don't even know if it's the right, if it's the best path. You just got to move. It's like you got to keep moving it. You've worked in tech. I've worked in tech. We've been in tons of thousands of meetings, and I would say probably 85% of them were absolutely like a waste of time. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'll say that for myself. A lot of times everybody's talking about what the right action is because we get so focused on not acting, we get focused on the outcome of acting, and that starts to slow everybody down because you're like, well, what if that's not the right way to do it, or what if that's not the best way to go to market, or should we be focusing on this thing? We don't really know all the answers to some of those things because there's second and third order effects. There's all these externalities that happen when we make an action. But if you start thinking about way too much about like what's going to happen if that action is not right, it bogs people down. You've probably seen that in a lot of different circumstances. I just spent the last, 18 months working as the chief of staff for the president of all the Americas. 70% of our revenue is at ServiceNow. And one of the things I noticed flying really close to the sun with the C-suite and, interacting with is that like a lot of times people don't know the best, like it's not that our C-suite doesn't know what they're doing. They absolutely do. But there's a lot of things that are very algebraic and we can do the math and we can be like, yeah, that's we should do this. Right. But a lot of the decisions that I think have to be made at every level, but certainly at in Ranger School and in the boardroom is things that that aren't like clearly defined and algebraic in nature. And so now someone's got to make a decision. And so making those quick decisions and knowing like, okay, of course you bring intelligence to the game, right? And context and past experience and market conditions and blah, 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 blah. But just acting is a sign of a good leader. Even if it's not the right action, you usually learn whether you were right about what the outcome was going to be after the fact.
That's a great point. You can solve so much by just taking that first step. I think in a lot of scenarios, I think that's spot on.
100%.
I love that.
And you know what? I found that, and I'm not even saying I'm great at it, but I found that that's actually sometimes really hard for people to do.
Yeah.
And especially when you have limited information and you have a time, you're time bound. And so there's action that needs to happen. Like that's sometimes difficult for people, me included, like, right? I have very limited information. I don't know. I know what is wanted. Is this the right course of action? Like you can iterate on that forever. People do,
Yeah. But there's a cost to that, right? I mean, waiting too long. I think there's
a cost associated with waiting too long. And there's a cost associated with moving too quick too, without like having as much thought and foresight and context and reaching out to other people to get some feedback. So there's a cost associated with both of them. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned reaching out to other people to get feedback. What's your general approach on that? Do you like to, get perspective, or like, let me think about it this way. When it comes to reaching out to people to get feedback, what's your general approach? Do you kind of are you more like a trust my gut kind of guy, or are you like, hey, let's try to get some insight from the whole group, or let's try to, talk with a mentor, or I don't know, some combination of those?
Yeah. It's probably a little bit of a combination. And, I always have a gut, for the most part, unless I'm completely out of my league and I know nothing about what I'm involved in. So I always like to trust my gut. Trusting your gut and saying out loud what your gut's telling you to everybody is two different things, right? And because, they're like, my gut could be wrong, but a lot of times my gut's not wrong on a certain subset of things. So getting, and the one thing I try to do, and I'm not perfect at it, but and I was even telling my team this week on our team call is like, look, like this is a safe space. Like this is there's allowed dissent here. You're allowed to say my baby's ugly. Like, and that's perfectly fine, even if I sign your bonuses, right? Like, let's just like get that out in the open. I even said this as the chief of staff. Like, I am the chief of staff by title when I was the chief of staff, but we are the chief of staff. It's not one person. It's a whole apparatus. Create an environment where people can feel like we can say some things and we can poke at things because, and that's great. What's even worse is when people sit and they have a thought like, that idea is stupid. And I know why, because I tried it 17 times and they don't say anything at all. Yeah. Like to me, that's even worse because, in a lot of these corporate settings, like I call it the petting zoo. You have a Teams or Zoom meeting with 20 people on it. And there's like, they're pitching this idea, and then you have all these stakeholders. There's been times where people are, texting me on the side going like, this will never work. I've tried this 100 times or whatever. And it's like, well, then say that out loud so we don't go down that road, right? But everybody wants to pet each other and not have any dissidents in these meetings. And that actually is the worst outcome than saying, hey, your baby's ugly and this is why, So I try to create environment, number one. Certainly I trust my gut. I do enough homework ahead of time to have some kind of reasonable, logical, intelligent, like something justifiable for the outcome. But then I lean on a lot of people for a lot of things, right? And I've even found that even when whether I think or I do have the answer to the question at hand, not coming right out the gate and saying it, like it's so beneficial to me because I start hearing what other people are saying. And I'm like, oh my God, man. I'm like, I'm not wrong. My answer wouldn't have been wrong, but it sure wouldn't have been as robust, I have mentors who I talk to about big, like higher level, professional growth. And what do I do like with this, this issue between teammates and things like that. But when it comes, I pick up the phone and be like, man, was I way off on that? I'm one of those guys. As soon as the meeting's over, I'll call you on your cell immediately and be like, hey, Jeff, like, am I like, does this pass the sniff test? What I said? Give me some feedback. Right. We all have biases and I'm certainly not the smartest in every room or any room. And I'm good with that. And so it's like, we're a sum of all of our parts for a reason, right? Like we have teams for a reason because you can't do most of the shit on your own. And it's not meant to be that way. And if it was, probably everything would come out like a surfboard or some labeled surfing or something. It would be my thing. It would be terrible. It would meet the objective.
Yeah. Thanks for going there. I really appreciate that perspective. And yeah, I've never been in your shoes, but it seems like truth to me. So I like it. Okay. So we're back in, from like a timeline perspective, you were in Ranger School, you made it through all three phases. And something I was wondering about as you went in, you'd already been on a deployment. Did you start like a little banged up? Like were you going there pretty healthy?
I felt pretty banged up, right? Because we got off deployment. I'd gone to pre-RASP, which is just like, beat you down. But what they were doing is they were hardening you for what was a task to come. I went into Ranger School, like not knowing if I could even run the 5-mile test that we were going to have like later that night. Like I was that thrashed, and then for me, there was an added measure of pressure on everybody who started in that January class, because what they have is they have something called Best Ranger. They do it every year. They bring, it's groups of 2 and they compete over the span of 5 or 6 days and nights. And you're working almost 24 hours a day doing all these tasks. And the Ranger Regiment always has people supported. I think Ranger Regiment's won the last 3 or 4 Best Rangers. Make a long story short, it's through a lot of these areas that you're doing Ranger schools. If you got held back in any of the phases that I was going through in my class, you had to wait 2 months because Best Ranger competition came through and took over a lot of the areas. So you would be painting rocks and telling people where they can sit and stand as for best Ranger. So like, I was like, if I don't make it out of the first phase, like I'm going to be stuck here for 2 months. If I don't make it out of the second phase, I'm going to be stuck here for, 7 weeks. And then if I don't make it out of Florida, so there was this added pressure because I got kids at home. I had 2 young girls and I'm like missing them. And so I have this thing chasing me and I'm going to be painting rocks, and bleachers for, people to watch best Ranger competition. So like that was like chasing us too during mine. Not that makes it easier or harder or anything. It's just for me, I didn't want to be sitting around for 2 months. I would go and say, that gets people in trouble. So that was chasing us. And so there was about 200 people that started with us in our company in Ranger School. There were 4 of us who actually made it through all 4 phases and made it straight through. 4 of us, me and 3 other people. I still am in touch with one of them today. So when you looked around, there was 200 people we were starting with. And then, after the first 3 weeks, knock off 30 or 40 or 50 of those. Phase 1, I think we had 12 people that made it out of phase 1. 12.
Wow.
And partly because they needed a lot of people to paint rocks. That's what I think. That could be wrong. That's my conspiracy theory. 12 of us made it to mountain phase, and then 6 of us made it to swamp phase, and 4 of us actually made it all the way through. Now, out of those 200, there's probably a large percentage of them that eventually made it through, but there's probably a large percentage of them that didn't make it through. I was just, and I'm not patting myself on the back. I still to this day, I'm like, how did I make it straight through? I don't know stats or anything. It happens, I don't know the stats, but I was just I was more grateful to make it straight through and not get stuck almost than anything else at the time.
That's brutal. And it's, it's not like you said, pat yourself on the back kind of thing. But let's also acknowledge the statistics there. Like that's a pretty small pass rate. That's brutal.
Yeah, I felt really lucky, and I had some really good people around me. And again, it goes back to like, I did not earn my Ranger tab on my own. You want to be a good battle buddy. Like if your buddy's that tired and you're going to be sitting in a hole overwatching a field all night long and you can't fall asleep, you let him go to sleep for 10 minutes and make sure you don't fall asleep, and then you flop it. You know what I mean? Or wake him up when the cadre comes around. There's a lot of that going on. So if you're not working with each other, you're working against yourself, Yeah. So it's the same thing in business too. If you're not working together, you're working against yourself most of the time.
That's so true. You're talking about how people treat you a little bit differently after you come out, you have your tab on, but did you feel differently when you finished that thing? That's an amazing accomplishment to come out, right? You're like, I just did something really, really hard. And on the other side of that, you got to feel differently about yourself.
It was really interesting. And I don't think I've ever really said this out loud before, but, when I got to graduation, number one, you're so tired and you just want to get out and go get in the car with your family or whoever's going to be there. Or even if there's nobody, you go have a hamburger by yourself and just get out of there, that you're so tired. I remember getting my tab and I was happy that it was over. I wasn't getting that dopamine hit that you think you would when you just cross the finish line of a really hard race or something like that, 'Cause, number one, it's you're looking at this piece of cloth. I didn't have this this moment that was just overwhelming. And because at the end of the day, the piece of cloth, the Ranger tab, just is a physical representation of an inward commitment that you just gave for 62 straight days, And when you look at it, it's and I've told this to other people in other scenarios, when you set goals, I'm going to go to Ranger School and I want to finish it and get my tab, or, I want to do 100 sit-ups straight, whatever it is, fill in the blank. As you progress along the path of succeeding at some goal you set, you actually have a physiological reaction. You get dopamine hits as you start to iteratively do better. Where you don't get dopamine hits? When you actually complete it. It's this is a proven thing in science. So what was the thing? It's the 62 days. It's not the graduation. And when I look back, I'm like that, I can't believe I made it through phase one. I can't believe I didn't get caught doing something dumb. I can't believe I made it through it all the way through. Like all those things, like in making it and progressing, like that, those were moments where like, that's like where the meat of my like Ranger school is. Graduating was that pinnacle point, and then but the thing is like, now I'm a tabbed E4. Am I going to be a saw gunner? And you go back and you're smiling and all of a sudden you realize like, 80% of Ranger Regiment has a tab on their shoulder too. And now you're if you go back to the 82nd or the 101st or the 3rd ID with a Ranger tab on, 82nd is a little less, but you're like you're the guy. In Ranger Regiment, you're not the guy because you have a Ranger tab. Mm-hmm. So even where you land after a tab, you're not real special in Ranger Regiment as a combat, as an 11 Bravo, a shooter with a Ranger tab, because that's what we have to do. And that's what everybody has. I know that's weird, but it did mean a lot to me because I learned more, I've gone through assessment selection. I've been to war, I've got to gotten into firefights and stuff like this. This shouldn't be as hard as it would be for somebody else. Absolutely. I was absolutely wrong. They're completely different. It was hard, yeah, sir. I had some tactical experience and things like that, but it was a completely different set of problems in a completely different environment, and so like you can't rest on your laurels and think it's going to take you through the day just because of that. How about that? But I will go and say like working on a cattle ranch and sleeping under trees, being hungry and cold, living on the beach, in Hawaii, like growing up with Lord of the Flies, all of those things as were some of all our parts had to have helped me there. I can't pinpoint exactly how. I could make some strings of connection, but like all of that stuff helped me to get there. Fighting over, bread on the table with 5 other brothers, right? I'm sure there's some parallels there. You're sneaking the last piece of chocolate cake in the middle of the night when no one's looking, at home. That was a transferable skill. So
that's awesome. What do you prefer when you described it, you're in the Ranger Regiment and you're one of many. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer the other one where you're kind of more standing out? I'm just thinking like those kind of parallels.
I prefer the blend. Yeah. Achievements are great. And like, I will always be proud of all the things that I got to do, including going to Ranger school. But to know like, that was hard, and everybody will admit no one will admit like Ranger school was a breeze. It was easy, right? Or whatever. And maybe there's people out there who feel that way. But watering it down because you're with a group of people, I liken it to like being a professor at a college. When you get your PhD and you got all your lays on you and your hat, you got your PhD diploma, like that's awesome. And then you go work at a university and everyone there has it too. So it's not that it cheapens it. Let's just say I don't know, pick your favorite regular Army unit where they might have 3 people in the whole battalion that have a Ranger tab. Like you're going to stick out and you're going to get they're going to give you the hard things and stuff because because it represents something, and people see that. Like that's a dangerous place for me and for individuals, because all of a sudden now, power can it can be taken and it can be abused, because just because you went through 62 days of hell or 100 days or whatever it was, like that's something that's to be, recognized and is an accomplishment. But as soon as you're done, like what's the next thing, right? In Ranger Regiment, you couldn't rest on that tab laurel. It's like, what are you doing next? And so that's what I really love about special operations and being in Ranger Regiment. Like you couldn't rest on your laurels that long. Everyone's got a combat infantry badge. Everyone's got deployment patches. People were walking around everywhere with Purple Hearts and everything. So it's like, it's a very unusual situation compared to like outside of that world within the Army and the military. Right. So I prefer that, because it keeps you grounded.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
And it's what I love. I'm going to skip way ahead and a little bit to transition. Yeah. Sometimes people transitioning out of the military and going into the regular workforce and civilian life and things like that, you got to take off the uniform, because in the military, and I wrote about, I did a blog on LinkedIn about this years ago. It was like, you have all your military bling that shows all the cool stuff you've done and blah, blah, blah. Like, you got to take that thing off. And in the civilian world, I couldn't tell Jeff that I don't know, have these accolades and awards and all these things unless you flashed them in front of me or told me, or I went down some rabbit hole on the internet and found out that you did, because you don't wear them every day, And so some people have a really hard time transitioning because they've now identified themselves so much with the things they did while they were in, that they have a hard time like having an identity on the outside. And I know I'm skipping ahead, but like, it kind of goes back to that same thing about in Ranger Regiment, there's so many people with all the good bling that like, go get all the bling that you can get. And you're still going to be like a lot of these people. You know? Like every deployment had its own thing, I got to a point, where I had to make a decision. I'm like, okay, well, I'm coming up on, 10 years is in very near reach. If I'm going to stay in for 10, and it go past one day past 10 years, do I just stay in for 20? Because I'm at that point, like I'm halfway there. Right. And like, that's a bad way to think about it. But that's kind of where my thought was. It's like, okay, this is a natural exit point. Right. And so I sat under a big tree for a little while and decided like, okay, this is the right thing for me. This is the right thing for the family. And especially having some young kids, like in Ranger Regiment, it's rough. Like, we get awards, we get plaques, we get, medals and all these things, but the wives and the kids or the spouses, I should say, the spouses and the families of especially special operators, but people in the military writ large, like, they don't get anything. And they're doing God's work, every day, every deployment, every training cycle and stuff like that. So it was the right thing for me. And it was daunting coming out. And I had a master's degree, I had a degree in economics. Like it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. Like, I had done some things, and seen some things, but it was still a little daunting, getting out, because you don't, like, oh, I got to go. I got to feed my family. I got to get a job. I got to all those things. I got to hang up my uniform. My Ranger tab doesn't mean as much out there. If I tell everybody I got a Ranger tab in the civilian world, like, some people might think that's awesome because they understand what it takes to get it, but you don't go around doing that because it's not going to win you any favors. It'll probably do the opposite. So it's like, you're hanging up a little bit of like the past, trying to figure out what I'm going to do in the future. And so it was, definitely for every transitioning person, whether you've been in for 4 years or 24 years, like, everybody's going to come to that point, right? It's not daunting and scary that you like, people just, well, maybe it is for some, they stay in. For me, it was just like, okay, like, this is a new set of hard work that I got to do to get to where I want to be.
Yeah. I mean, I've obviously never experienced that, but I could imagine. And from what I've heard, yeah, I mean, it's a big piece for your identity. And I couldn't imagine that how you could go through something for a decade or even, a shorter period. And like, that just becomes a part of you. And so you move on. There's like a little, I don't know, there's like almost like a mourning period as, you kind of leave that part of you behind and try to move forward. That's super interesting. So what did you end up, like, you got out, you're like, I'm going to try to figure something else out. Did you already have an idea of what you wanted to do? Or is this another, well, I know I don't want to be, I know I'm not going to be a Ranger anymore, but I'm going to do something else. And you're like, I'll just figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely a bit of it. I knew where I wanted to physically be. I wanted to be back home on the beach in California. So I knew I was going there. Like, nice. So I said, I've had enough with the, hot, muggy and buggy Georgia. I love myself some Georgia, but I was ready to go back to the beach and be back home with my people. But I didn't. It was funny. It's such a strange chain of events. When you get out of the military, it's so archaic, right? You have this piece of paper that you walk around and you get it signed off like, you don't owe any money at the library. And they sign it off. You got to do this checklist and it's literally a piece of paper, by the way. And you go, and when you're done, you turn it in and you start to out process and do these things. So honest to God, I'm sitting here thinking like, what do I want to do? Maybe, I got this GI Bill thing. Maybe I'll go back and, I actually applied and got into a master's degree, in New York City. And I just was like, no, I don't want to go back to school. And so I had to go to the education center, which was one of those sign-offs, right? And make sure that you didn't owe anything to the education center. So of course I just needed a signature, which should have taken a 30 seconds. I sat there for 2 hours, waiting. Just what you do a lot in the military. And as I was sitting there, I was so bored. I was just starting to read every pamphlet that I could get my hands on, just to read something while I'm sitting there, not to poke a dull spoon in my eye. And I started going through, and I found this pamphlet that said, Software Academy, right? And I'm like, man, I don't know anything about coding, and that scares me, right? But they're like, and I had about 6 months left of my contract. And it said, well, you know what? We're going to do, it's a Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, MSSA. And you can use part of your GI Bill, you get it signed off, and you go for 3 straight months, and you literally go into a coding camp, right? And there's different tracks. And so you gotta pass the certification. And I'm like, wow, man, tech is evergreen. I've never thought about it. Tech is always going to be growing, and if I wouldn't work for a horse and buggy company years ago, and all of a sudden the bicycle came out in the car, I'm out of business, right? But tech's never going to do that. That was my thinking, and I still stand by that. I said, so I might as well do this, right? And I said, I got 6 months. It's a 3.5 month course, and it's on cloud application development. I didn't even know what the cloud was at the time, and it was fairly new, especially for Microsoft, but for the globe, it was kind of new because it was all created on excess capacity by Amazon. They started selling excess capacity, introduced the cloud, and then every hyperscaler, jumped on board. And so I actually got myself in through, a lot of pain with my commander to finally sign off, and, got a certification in Microsoft something or other that allowed me to get in the course. And I learned how to code C++, C#, JavaScript. I coded enough to realize I never want to be a coder. But I was making little applications. I could spin up VMs and do these things in the cloud, and it got my mind understanding terminology and enough to be dangerous where I could open up, a cloud portal and actually code something like Hello World or something, what I mean? So, it wasn't dangerous, but I understood enough. And what came out of that was access to interviews too, because I had a, top secret clearance. I could speak Army, came from regiment. A lot of the tech companies at the time were really, and you'll know this, about 10 to 15 years ago, you want people who have the tickets to the dance, meaning you can get into a secret and secure facility, a top secret facility. And they want people. So if you have those, that's a really great thing. And then if you can understand tech, and now you're cooking, right? So the tech companies were really looking, especially at this time, focusing heavily on the public sector and the federal business, right? And so I interviewed with Google, I interviewed with Amazon, I interviewed with Microsoft, and at Fort Benning, because they brought the college did it there on base. Got offers from Facebook, right? Thank God I didn't take it, because I'm just really happy I didn't take it. But I interviewed with Microsoft in Fort Benning. Said, hey, we want to fly you to Redmond, and interview. You'll probably have about 5 or 6 interviews over 2 days. And so I go, oh man, yeah, cool. I made it to the next round. Well, I go there, and you're in this room with 50 people, and it's speed dating interviewing, right? There's 2 doors. There's rooms all down the door, and they'll be porter, room 8. And you go in there and you sit down, and someone interviews, and you would do that 3 or 4 times a day, twice for 2 days. Well, they were looking for technical people, right? Because I was coming out of a software academy. I went in there, and everybody was wanting me to whiteboard kung fu, some code up on the whiteboard, which I had practiced for and stuff. But what I decided when I was walking in there, I'm like, no, I'm just going to tell the truth. And so I literally I walked in every interview, and I said, if you're looking for someone who's a coder, who's an engineer, tech, I'm not your guy. I don't want pizza slid under the door while I just keep banging around on keyboards. But if you want somebody who can connect people with technology, I'm your guy. That's what I want to do. And I swear to God, at the end of the 2 days, they came out and they go, everybody really loves you. we're looking for technical depth and people who want to be coders and people who want to be this and that and a technical account manager, all these things. And they're like, but we're going to hold on to your resume because like we'd love to see you here. And I'm like, that's what they tell everybody who didn't make it through this, right? So I'm like, thanks. And I ended up over the next few weeks or month, I ended up getting a job with a company called Cubic, right, here in San Diego, and I was going to be a program manager. And I'm literally about 2 weeks from packing up my stuff and driving across the United States with a U-Haul to San Diego, where I was going to start my job 3 or 4 weeks later. And I get a call from the recruiter at Microsoft. And I like, hey, someone found your resume and they really want to talk to you. And you know what I said? I said, lose my number. I already accepted a job and they gave me all my concessions and I hung up. I literally hung up on the recruiter.
It's a bold move.
I'm not saying that was the smartest thing to do, but I did that.
It's bold. Hey, I like it. Keep going. This is great.
And then all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, I get a phone call from an unknown number. And I pick it up, and this guy says, "Hey, his name's Steve." Steve's like, "Hey, don't hang up on me. Like I'm the senior director. I run the Army team here at Microsoft, and I just want to talk to you. Like, I found your resume, and I was in the 101st. I have my Ranger tab. I know what you guys do. Like, just hear me out." And I'm just like, "Oh boy, here we go," And come to find out, Steve's roommate, who he commissioned with, was the 2nd Ranger Battalion commander, right? So I'm like, oh, well, okay, I know Colonel Burgess, yeah. And we started talking, and I'm like, God, man, like I get to be back selling stuff to the Army, selling stuff even, like to the meat eaters of the world. Like I know that world. Like I don't know program management for Cubic, and Steve did a really good job. 3 days later, I'd gone through the whole interview chain and they gave me an offer 4 days later and I took it.
Wow.
And I had to call up somebody who was in my, the VP at Cubic was in my MBA course and he was doing like, I want you. I had to call him up and be like, hey, sorry, man, I'm not coming. I'm going to Microsoft, but I literally hung up the phone on the recruiter and it took Steve. Steve is the greatest seller in the world. Now he's the president of the Americas at ServiceNow. Steve Walters ran the Army team, he's done really well for himself. He's a good friend and a great human, which ties back to how I ended up at ServiceNow years later. Same connection. But I cut my teeth there on the Army team and I surrounded myself with really good people. And unknowingly, like the first thing you always do when you get to a new company is you find out who not to go to for help. And all of a sudden you're closer to somebody who can actually help you. And I found myself with some really good, smart people. And we ended up together doing some really awesome stuff, working on the IVAS deal. I found that within the first year, we closed I closed an $850 million deal, like my first year. I didn't even know that wasn't normal. And I'm not saying it's not abnormal either, but and I had some success there. And then I ended up from there taking over our special operations portfolio at Microsoft and ran that, which was one of the greatest like jobs I think I will ever have. Right. One of them, because I felt like I was almost doing more at that point, working with, SEAL teams, working with, DevGru, all of the operators, the TSOCs around the world, and like really doing things that had like purpose and mission and clarity. And they have money too in special operations. So it's nicer to work with people who have money instead of trying to pry it out of the hands of the other mildeps. But I had such a great time there. And then I got tapped to run our Air Force and then our Space Force business at Microsoft, which I didn't know anything about space. And I didn't know anything about the Air Force other than they have the best gyms and chow halls. I've learned that there's a lot more to the Air Force than those two things. That was the span of almost 10 years. I have really fond memories of Microsoft and I did well there. And I'd like to think I had a good brand there when I left. And it was really hard to leave because Steve Walters picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, I need a COO of global public sector. And I said, Steve, I don't know. I don't know how to be a COO. I don't know what that is. He's like, you'll figure it out, and he's like, remember what I told you when I first met you? And this is like one of the best things that anybody has ever done for me, in my professional career. And I'll go back to when Steve hired me. And so I drive my U-Haul across the United States, unpack everything, blah, blah, blah. Couple weeks later, I'm hired. Steve Walters flies to San Diego. We meet in La Jolla at the Microsoft office and we go through our HR stuff. I sign some things. It gives me a computer and we kind of go through all the boring stuff of onboarding. And then he slides me a green American Express card. And he goes, hey, this is your American Express, like use it, travel wherever you need to. Just make sure you're just like, like you're doing it for a reason. He goes, make sure all of your expenses are in on time and that you do all of your training. And I go, okay, I could do that. And I go, but I've never done this before, Steve. I've never sold before, like at a tech company. Like, dude, am I going to buddy up with somebody? Like, like, should I shadow somebody and kind of learn how they do this? He goes, no, they'll ruin you. He goes, you owe me $10 million. That's your quota. And don't be late on your expenses. Make sure you do your training. And gets up and walks out the door. And I sweat all the way back home, 45 minutes from La Jolla to my house up in Carlsbad. I sweat the whole way home going like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, we're not going to teach you what to do, or I'm not going to buddy you up with someone because you'll start thinking like everybody. And so now I'm like left on my own. Like I owe him $10 million for my quota. And here's a subset of accounts and like go knock it out of the park. And of course they give you the worst ones, as the new guy. And that scared the hell out of me. That might've been scarier than anything I did in the military. To be honest with you. And that was the best thing Steve could have done for me. Because when you don't know what to do, you do what you know. And so I was afraid of the SIX shop. And for people who don't know what the SIX shop is, like the CIO shop where they, procure technology for the military and all these things. Like I didn't deal with those people when in uniform. I was blowing up stuff, shooting guns and so what did I do? I went and started talking to the people that I could have a conversation with, all the meat eaters, right? Out at the edge, right? People who were getting ready for deployment, people who were, were in charge of EOD and all these things, because I know them and like we could have a conversation and I had a little bit of street cred coming out of regiment. And that was the place that no one was going. I had no idea. Everybody had been selling box software to the CIO and coming back every year and being like, here's your new bill. And, we have this new thing called O365, blah, 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 blah. And they kept going back there. Well, the customers of the CIO are the people out there doing things, right? And they procure and buy things to support the mission of the people who are on what I call the edge. So what I found is that the edge had never really been touched, and it was completely accidental. And I blame it on Steve for not telling me. I would have been trying to sell to the CIO shop. And in that, we found, how to redo our night vision and thermal with AI spread all over it called IVAS. I won't even go into that because that was a whole couple of years of my life that I'll never get back again. But I found that $850 million deal. Well, I found, I went to Afghanistan 3 times with Microsoft to go support the NATO special operations in Kabul and all over the country. Like, and I know it sounds strange, but it's because Steve said, I'm not going to teach you or let someone teach you what to do, because we hired you because we don't want you to be the same as everybody else. It was one of the greatest things he did. And he said the almost exact same thing when he asked me to be a COO. I said, I don't know how to be a COO. He goes, you'll figure it out. You did it before. So yeah. So, and that almost landed me where I'm at right now.
First of all, shout out to Steve for seeing that in you and knowing it and trusting you and being like, hey, look, I believe in you and you got this. And, and we're hiring you because you're a little bit different. And we, let's embrace that. Let's really lean into that. But dude, that takes a lot of trust. And I don't know, like, I guess from 2 angles, like it takes a lot of trust from him. And it also, that makes for a tough path forward for you, like ultimately it worked out okay. But I mean, I don't know, like, is that something you kind of, it sounds like that's something you value looking back, that it's not like he didn't, give you the kid gloves. He really like just let you figure it out on your own and you learned it. You kind of did it your own way.
Yeah. I think back on that a lot. And how it was risky for both sides, me and Steve in the business. But it was also the thing, like I don't think I would have had the success otherwise, just if I wasn't just left out essentially in the desert to walk like Kane from Kung Fu around the globe, trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be. For those of you who remember Kane from Kung Fu. Because what I did is I didn't, and we talked about this before about, heuristics versus like algebraic way of problem solving. Like if I tell my girls, and you'll get where I'm getting at. If I tell my girls, if they say, Dad, I want to be a surgeon. How do I do it? What do I do? Like, you know what? That's a great thing for your kid to say to you. And probably a lot of us would say, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I'm going to point out maybe some costs associated with it. Like, okay, here's your choice. You should probably go, chemistry or something, and then from there you should go to a good medical school. And then you really want to be careful about where you're going to go do your interning and things like that. And like we would say, like, here's like a good path. And we do this all the time with our kids. Well, what ends up happening, if I gave the recipe, which I have a lot of recipes that I would love to give my kids, but if you do that, they only now own the downside risk and not the upside. If they succeed, it was your idea. If they fail, it was because they failed because they couldn't do it. Does that mean we shouldn't give advice to our kids? No, absolutely not. But we got to be careful when you tell someone how to do something and this is the path. It's easy for them. They own the failure now and they don't own the success. Like Steve let me go heuristically, like bounce around and figure it out. And because I had some intelligence about, some things and I knew some people, I was having conversations with people that had never had conversations with technologists at that time because they were out there trying to figure out like how to, kill more bad guys and save more good guys. It wasn't a conversation people were having with them, but they were the ones who were actually telling the CIO shop and their units what they actually need. Right. And so I could have bumped in. I could have done a lot of wrong things. And I did. I chased things that I probably shouldn't have chased. And I learned along the way, but I also stumbled upon things like pots of gold because like there are people who want to fix the thing that they have and make it better. And they never knew they could. So I'm not saying I'm a genius. It was just really because I was scared of the CIO shop. I didn't know those people, Oh, those are the nerds who know how to play with computers. Like, I don't know that world. Like, so I'm going to go talk to the guys who blow stuff up and shoot guns during the day. Like, I know them. And it just happened to, you've been in tech and you've worked in public sector and we've seen how it works. And, and so it just broke the mold. And Steve made me go heuristically bump into things and didn't give me this recipe or algebraic way of decision making that, like if you do what you've always done, you get what you always got.
Yeah. And I love that perspective of adding the extra layer to allowing people to own and learn from any success or any failure. I think there's wisdom in that.
It's risky
by not giving them necessarily your recipe. Yeah.
It's risky because you like Steve wanted to succeed. I know that. And he's been very successful. He wanted to succeed. So telling somebody like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Just go figure it out. He's taking a risk too. Right. I think we tend as humans to want to tell people like, here's what I would do if I were you. Like you should do this, and this because of, and it could be grounded in logic. It could actually be true and all of those things. But then all of a sudden people start to anchor to that. And that's when you stop. Like, I don't want to call it innovation, but I use Claude all the time. I use Anthropic. I use all the different models and stuff like that. Like, if I kept doing this, I don't know if I'd know how to respond to an email written by myself in 30 years, right? You know what I mean? Like I gave something up, am I giving something up? I still would, but you know what I mean? It's like now, like it's telling me it's telling people what to do and people are actually listening to it and all these things. And like all of a sudden you're taking this critical thinking and this kind of bumping into things in the world aspect out of it. And I am not bagging on AI. I'm like, I sell it for a living, but you lose something when you turn it over to the recipe and you turn it over to the LLM or you turn it over to the fill in the blank. And because what you're doing is you're putting uncertainty and fear into somebody else's box. So you don't have to own it because it feels better to do something that someone tells you to do because then I don't have to own the fear. I just outsource the fear. And uncertainty.
Yeah. I mean, and uncertainty is risk. And so sure, if you're outsourcing the risk, you're giving it to someone else, then there is an amount of that you can do, but also risk is directly related to reward. So you're also missing out on the potential opportunity by giving that up. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Know thyself, right? It's a
sure.
Things Greek. Know thyself. You know what we're not very good at? Knowing who we really are. People are better about knowing who we are than we are. We're really biased. Like we have a pretty damn good idea, but we're not really good about knowing who we are because sometimes we think we're worse than we are. Sometimes at certain things, sometimes we think we're better than we are. Sometimes we think we know who we are, but we're not very good at that because we have all these biases. So if we don't know who we are, we also don't know what our potential is. Right. And so that's why I don't like, who am I? Like if I ever figure out who I am, I just box my upside in, you know? So and the way you know who you are is by taking risks and taking adventures. We talked about this before we started this, right? You take adventures, it forces responsibility, even if it's telling the truth, you know, cause there's a million ways like you could tell someone how to tell a hard truth to somebody, but that's just not easy no matter what. You got to go there. You got to put your tail between your legs or whatever it is, and just be like, I screwed up, or whatever. All those little adventures, whether they're adventures getting on a plane or a boat or going to Hawaii or whatever, like they force responsibility. And so when you strip some of that away, to your point, you strip away some of the upside and that dopamine hit as you go along. Like if you tell me everything I'm supposed to do and I hit those gates, I guarantee you I'm not going to get the iterative dopamine hit that I would otherwise.
Yeah.
At least I think. I'm not a doctor.
Well, yeah, I think you're spot on. I heard this Huberman line, recently where he was talking about anything that gives you dopamine without effort will ultimately destroy you. And, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, he sounded pretty smart behind it. So I'll take that word.
Risk is a really interesting topic, right? Risk and uncertainty, is like people have written books through the ages about uncertainty and risk. I talked about him with you in some setting before, like Nassim Taleb. I think he's such a great thinker. He's definitely a hard individual on people who, aren't as intelligent as him when he's interviewing, but he's got a great book out there called, he's got Upside of Irrationality, The Black Swan, and then, Anti-Fragile. And Anti-Fragile, how can you make things stronger when there's volatility and uncertainty in the world? Right. So think about like Anti-Fragile, like if you have a glass vase in a box, the harder you shake it, the stronger it gets. Like, how could I get like that when there's uncertainty and there's volatility? How do you not break real fast? It goes back to a lot of like, we're not very good about knowing what we want to be when we grow up, even though we think we are. We're really good about knowing what we don't want to be. So in uncertainty, you start to take the things you don't want out of the system immediately, right? And I'm not saying I was thinking this consciously about it, but that's what I was doing when I got into that helped me get through Ranger School, but also helped me know, like, what do I do when I don't know what to do? Because now I have a $10 million I owe Microsoft, and I have all these metrics and things and blah, blah. So how about this? I know what I don't want. And immediately I started doing that. And that's, to me, as close as I can get to in decision making that is induced with uncertainty and risk. Is you start taking everything out of the system, deductive reasoning, and then now you're left with like, okay, I don't know what to do. I know what not to do. So now I'm left with something closer that might be the right thing to do. Like, I know it's really maybe a wacky way to think about the world, but to me, it's a problem solving mechanism that I use all the time.
Yeah. Dealing with uncertainty, do you think that's like a muscle that you get better at the more that you do it, or dealing with risk? Or is it kind of, for you, do you kind of have the kind of same reaction to different levels of uncertainty?
I think you grow a muscle, an uncertainty muscle. Here I am self-proclaiming, but I think I learned some of that without even thinking about it for over a span of many years of my life, because the only way that you can, in my opinion, deal with uncertainty and then get better at it is to completely fail and fall on your face. Cause you can't like uncertainty. Like when I go out in the ocean, when I surf, and I used to surf a lot. I surf a little bit now. The ocean is different every day. Like you literally could get eaten by a great white shark. I surfed this morning. I could have been eaten by a great white shark. So there's uncertainty there. Yeah. Well, there's probability too, but there's uncertainty. So, when you go into uncertain environments and all of a sudden something smacks you down, like you didn't realize like this place that you're surfing, you've never surfed, is way crazier when you're out here than it looked like on the beach. Like now you're in a situation like I'm dodging waves. I got to get back in. I don't have a big enough board, all these things. You do that a few times, you realize like, okay, like I can go and screw up and I can survive that and then go back at it again. So I think it takes having some licks in life, whether that's business or whatever it might be, fill in the blank, so like you can't just attack uncertainty and be successful every single time. And so you got to be good with being unsuccessful at uncertainty, right? Because you're taking that step. You're not taking a recipe and saying, oh, everybody who walks this path across the river is going to make it. That sounds great. I feel, more people are hit and struck and killed by cars in crosswalks than jaywalking because we feel safe.
Wow.
You put your head down, you walk across the striped white lines.
Looking at your phone.
You get hit by a truck. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. The illusion of safety, or the illusion that you're avoiding risk.
Yeah. I mean, people go to college because they think that equals a good job.
Yeah.
Could it? Absolutely. Would I say the probability of getting a better job having the degree than not a degree is there? Yeah, it's math. It's probability. But you know what? I learned this. I think it doesn't equal, a $500,000 like a year job. Like you got to work at that shit. Like, and so like, I know we're going down a rabbit hole, but that whole idea of like, I feel safe here is an illusion in a lot of areas. Because when you're jaywalking, you're not algorithmic anymore. You're looking both ways. You're paying way more attention and you're running across the street.
I remember originally on our first conversation, you described heuristics as street smarts, and that's the perfect example of it. Literally street smarts, knowing where you are and how to take care of yourself on the street. That's heuristics there. That's fascinating. So there's like this craving for like safety. We all want safety and comfort. I also agree with you that doesn't necessarily exist where either people are going to tell you it exists or where your logical brain might think it exists. Yeah. That's a really good approach, man. I love that.
Yeah. It can get you in trouble too. There's costs and benefits to both sides of it. Right. But it's one way to approach uncertainty, right? Because there's so much uncertainty in our lives, but we mask it all the time. Like we're really good about knowing from a probability perspective when the 100-year flood is going to hit. We're really bad about knowing when the 1,000-year flood is going to hit. And so what we do is we build to spec and code to the 100-year flood. And then the 1,000-year flood comes and it wipes out entire cities, so there's some of that thinking too. Like, there's those outliers in life. Like think about this. Like it's one of the reasons why I think when a company, and I'm not going to even name companies, like where you have a really high floor, like the base pays are really good, but there's a ceiling that you're like, I might make $400,000. Let's just say, and I'm making this up, but I'll never make $1 million. But that space in between there, that between 4 and 900K is a really nice, comfortable place to live, and what you see at companies that have a very high floor and a low ceiling is that you get a lot of people who you're not going to get your best performers who just want to sit in that band. You're probably not going to get your lowest performers, but you're going to get mediocrity in that band. Yeah. I don't know how that all connects, and I don't know why that came out, but it certainly was part of what I was getting at.
I think it's super interesting, and you're spot on, right? I mean, I think it's just about like this idea of where we see safety versus risk, and I think you're spot on. Yeah. There's danger in mediocrity too, I think, right? I mean, because there's comfort there. You're sitting there to your point, like, hey, people get a decent salary. They feel comfortable. Maybe they're not driven to perform because they're only due to comfort. They don't want to, they're not either believing in the mission maybe, or they're not, or for many different reasons. I think my takeaway is that I think that where we think we're getting comfort is actually maybe in the short term true, but in the longer run, I think that's ultimately the bigger risk is just staying in your comfort zone and not growing and like,
yeah. When you look at it and you're a great example of going out and doing something that is pretty risky, right? Like you were very successful in the tech industry and you decided I'm going to shift my focus to something that I want to do and I love to do, but I'm not sure how successful from a monthly monetary good perspective this is going to be. Like, I don't know. I'm not speaking for you. You never told me those words, but so you
know, you're spot on, by the way. Yeah.
That's a big risk. Right. And so, but think about this, and that stops people right there from doing something that's uncomfortable. And so when you're super comfortable, you don't grow that much. Right. And so people will say, I really don't like my job all that much. Like I've been here for X amount of years. Like I kind of want to go get something else or maybe jump fields or something. And then they look, they're like, oh, almost what I did in the military. Well, if I hit 10 years in one day, maybe I should just stay for the rest of the 10 years. Right. Perfect example of me sticking my foot in my mouth, but it's true. And so what people do is they start to use the fear and the uncertainty as the driver to decision making. When Steve called me up and said, come be the COO, I'm like, gosh, man, I'm a senior director. I'm running Air Force, Space Force. Like I got a good trajectory here. I started thinking like that. And ultimately, I don't want to be that person. I'm more scared of me staying somewhere for 20 years because I have a great gig. Why would I leave this gig? Even though I'm really, I'll always look back and be like, should have taken that COO position. I really wanted to, but this is a safe spot. You use the fear of uncertainty as the reason to keep you here. I don't want to be the guy 20 years from now going like, shit, man, I wish I would have tried that COO thing or, because I don't ever think if I had that time, I would never go back and be like, man, I'm glad I didn't do that COO thing. I've been riding this wave for 23 years here. I don't want to be the guy to look back. And now I'm 20 years older and that's about it. And I really haven't gone and done something that makes me really uncomfortable. Right. And I'm not a superhuman or anything. And I don't love sticking myself in, maybe if I look back, I'm a masochist. I like putting myself in situations that are painful. I would have more regrets as a 80-year-old man, not trying things that I thought were interesting and scary and uncertain. And I wasn't smart enough to should be in that position. I don't want to be that guy. Cause when I think about my 80-year-old future self, I'm going to look back and be like, oh, I'm glad you just stayed safe and never took a risk for her. I don't want to be that guy either.
Totally. Cause I think inside we know that there's no growth there. Even people that have had really big failures, stuff that's really, really impacted their lives. They don't regret that they tried, that they went after it, that they stuck their neck out. Because if you just don't quit at some point, there's so many lessons to learn. On the other hand, there are so many of those where people are like, I freaking regret that. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done whatever else. I think that's spot on, man.
When you look at when we had chatted about this, I went to Hawaii and I was dead set. I'm never leaving here. Never going to leave here.
Yeah.
And then through the chain of events that happened, I said, oh man, I'm not going back. I'm going to go do something different. So what I thought, what I had planned my trajectory in life, like we actually know that at 20 years old or 21, we think we do. Everything went the other direction, partly by choice and partly, by breaking my femur and shattering my kneecap. It was a forcing function, but, so again, was that a failure? I don't think so.
No.
It wasn't that I failed at what I thought my plan was. I guess if my plan was to stay in Hawaii forever, I wouldn't have the context and the thought to be like, why would you ever say that at 21, 22 years old? You know, that you're going to stay here forever. You just like cut off all the decision nodes on this decision tree, you know, like moving forward. And it forced me to get out of that, you know, in a lot of different ways. And all of a sudden the decision nodes open up, you know, and now I can take, you know, I'm like, I love game theory. And so I started thinking, and so I didn't fail. I may have failed at my pursuit of living in Hawaii forever. I could have gone back and lived there forever. But what it did is it opened that if you want to call it a failure, opened up the canvas, just grew 100x.
Yeah. I love the way that you kind of reframed that too, in that, yeah, in the moment it felt like a failure, but you know what, actually, it really opened up my view, and I was able to see, like you said, the whole canvas. When I wouldn't have been able to see it before. Bro, I think that's super good. I love that. That feels, I mean, look, anything we haven't covered?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing I'll maybe close with, and you can use this or not, but the thing that I would say is that, you know, having, what did you call it? The spiral, the professional spiral.
Yeah.
I you know, I don't think that I've done anything that's, you know, out of the ordinary or anything like that, as far as like, you know, what I've done. And everybody's got an awesome story. Everybody's done hard stuff. It doesn't mean that you've like had to go through the snow in the Appalachians. That just happens to be something that I did. Everyone's got a hard thing. It's not always a physical trait. We often, have attribution error that like you attribute hard things to like, oh, someone who went through, you know, SEAL Team 6 training or something like that. Like, sure, that's hard. Everybody has hard stuff. What I've learned doing a lot of different things, and I've done a lot of different things, right, in my life, is that now this actually gets me excited. I don't know all the things that I get to do in the next 30 years. And that to me is exciting. There's a lot of decisions that I can make. There's a lot of outcomes that'll come from those. And, you know, I don't have the right answers. And sometimes I don't even know what the wrong answers are, but like, that's the beauty of like, you know, I feel much more comfortable in my life having gone through all those things that I did, because I'm less afraid of the unknown of the future and more excited about it, because I've got to do so many things, you know, and I've had good things happen, bad things happen, made good decisions, made bad decisions. I like, there's still so many of those things that come, and like, I'm going to make a lot of bad decisions, but you know what? I'm going to get to like the life is a fun ride if you kind of, and it's all the perception that you have about it. And it's taken blood, sweat, and tears, and I've touched the hot burner 100 times, but like, you know, I love there's so many new things for me to learn and to like go do and to try and to fail at, maybe succeed at. And I feel really grateful, you know, to have done and met the people I have. And, you know, I'm a very grateful person, and I'm looking forward to whatever the 100 adventures of the future are too. Right. You know, and when it all's said and done, you know, right now I'm the VP of Global Public Sector. Like, my favorite job ever was a landscaper, mowing lawns and planting trees in Hawaii on the beach. So I know I can always go back, because I can run a broom, I can run a shovel, and I can run a mop. And I don't have an ego that's above that. And so I know I can always be happy. And that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. You think TC's still there?
You know what?
Wasn't that the guy's name? You told me TC?
TC. Yeah. If TC's still there, I bet
he's still there, man. Maybe you can call him up.
Standing with his hat saying, work harder, waste time, waste money. Yeah. I hope he's learned a little more English since I was there, you know, 30 or 25 years ago or whatever it was. So, but TC's probably still floating around there, you know, is what I'm thinking. Yeah. Good memory.
That was a great story. I remember it. So anyway, David, this has been awesome, man. I super appreciate your time and everything here. Yeah, I'll click the end, and I think people are just going to get a ton out of this.